8 causes of chronic fatigue type issues. My name is Eileen. I'm a stress management expert. I'm a soul empowerment coach, healer, and therapist. I'm also someone that in my, it would be actually from the age of 19, began to suffer what people would call a chronic fatigue or a post-viral type illness. And I went down a very long, windy path, looking for lots of answers. And, along that path, I had lots of different opinions. I spent thousands and thousands of pounds on things that were supposed to help and didn't always help. And one of the things that we are seeing at the moment is we're seeing a lot of people having fatigue type disorders and post-viral type disorders. We just need to look at post-COVID and things like that. And one of the things that I know as a healer or therapist, there can sometimes be a lot of overgeneralizations about fatigue, and fatigue disorders can be very varied and very different in an individual, and there can be a lot of misinformation out there, which can cause a lot of confusion for the therapist, the healer, also the client. And it can be very frustrating for the client if they're going down a very long path and they tend to hit a brick wall with therapist upon therapist and end up, doing approaches that actually don't really solve the issue or help them move forward. Now, I'm going to talk about 8 different, types of causes of chronic fatigue. And when I'm going to talk about them, I'm going to have to, remind people that often it's not just one cause. It's often accumulation of more than one issue that is causing the chronic fatigue. Now, as a backstory to this, I think I maybe should add some other information that can maybe help people get a bit less confused and maybe look at these fatigue disorders from a wide perspective. And when I was about 19, I was mercury poisoned, but at the same time, it was very hard to know right away after the mercury poison, I had what appeared to be a virus. You would think it would be a flu virus. That's how it presented itself. Now, was it a flu virus, or was it my body trying to detoxify from the mercury poison? Now, a dentist accidentally put mercury up the root canal instead of the tooth. And I would have the most bizarrest, strangest experiences, which included periods of paralysis. I had what I said appeared like a really, really bad flu. So I had all the symptoms of what a flu would look like. And later I would be diagnosed as like having post-viral fatigue, and then it was an ME diagnosis. Now, for people that, that was a long, long time ago. I'll be 55 soon, so that's been a long, long time ago. That was now over, 35 years ago. Now, there's been a lot of changes in terminology since then in relation to fatigue, post-viral fatigue and fatigue disorders. And it's almost like lots of things in life. There can be categories that are helpful and categories that are not helpful, and categories that kind of miss the point. And one of the things that happens, and I know this in the healing and the therapy industry, and even the wellness industry, and even doctors and nurses, they can often lump categories together that can be helpful and sometimes not as helpful. So years ago, say, for example, ME was very separate to just a fatigue disorder, or what they call TATT. TATT was another thing, tired all the time. So they didn't necessarily lump someone that had ME together. And also this post-viral, someone that there was a clear definition that was a post-viral fatigue was very different sometimes, again, from other fatigue disorders. So it's really, really important to remember this, because, again, sometimes the doctors can use the wrong terminology. And one of the biggest complaints early on was that doctors sometimes were classing people that had just were tired all the time as having ME, when there was a whole ME was a whole different thing. And then there was other people not getting proper diagnoses. They were regarded as having tired TATT all the time, or a chronic fatigue, when there was more complexities. Now, everybody kind of different opinion of what these categories mean. But for a lot of definitions and for a lot of reasons, some of it was all lumped together. But that can cause major problems for the client again, because again, if you think about it, there can be huge differences by the cause and the triggers. Now, of course, most triggers of disease have a stress component, and you cannot miss that out. But as I talk about some of these things, these 8 different types of things, and in some ways, the way that I've categorized, I'm just doing it to simplify. Some other people might categorize these different categories slightly different, but it's just to simplify things. So as a therapist or as a healer or a wellness practitioner, it's really important to be able to look at things holistically. If you don't, and you just focus on one area, if you think about the holistic wheel, we tend to look at the body, the person's mind, body, emotions, and environment, right? And maybe spiritually and other things that's going on. But I'm going to obviously mention these 8 things, and you'll understand how the different components actually are important to address, and some situations that I know of and I've experienced and seen in clients or friends or whatever, where maybe when people approach just one angle, it didn't help the client. So first and foremost, obviously anxiety and stress are going to be a major cause of any type of problems in the mental, emotional body and the physical body. Anxiety and stress, and particularly chronic anxiety and chronic stress, leads the body to move into what we call the fight or flight response. And the body then starts producing an imbalance of hormones, because the stress response is a survival response, and it's supposed to be just a temporary thing that happens occasionally. And the body will respond in certain ways with certain hormones, and it will do certain things to the body for us to be able to survive a threatening situation. But when the body is in a state of chronic anxiety or chronic stress, the body it's almost its own autopilot, and that can be low level. It's maybe not always obvious, but what has happened is the body now is in this chronic stress response. Okay, and if you think about chronic anxiety, it causes that chronic stress response in the body, because when you constantly worry, you're putting the body under stress. Now, we can put in that category also trauma, because even though trauma might not be originally a chronic thing, it might just be a shock or something, and trauma can come in different ways. And sometimes people think of trauma just in a mental or emotional perspective, but trauma can come physically. If you think of you've had a traumatic injury to the body, and what that can create to the shock and the impact. One of the things that I always talk about, which I always notice that particularly in the healing industry, the therapy industry don't always talk about, is also the traumatic thing that the body goes through when the body, say for example, it's a break, or the something's knocked out and of alignment. What that can actually do to the whole body system, it puts the body in stress, because organs and muscles or tissues can then end up in the wrong place. Now, I remember before I was mercury poisoned, I had a really bad fall down, for anybody who knows Sucky Hall Street in Glasgow. I fell down a sheet of ice, and it really impacted my tailbone. And that actually caused me so many problems from a young age, just before even I was mercury poisoned. And I spent a lot of time going back and forward to body therapists. I did a lot of things. I was a young person. I took a job that didn't help. I was doing lifting crates, and I worked for odd bins at one point, doing things, and I'm only 4'9", and I was not, I was quite small. So trying to lift these boxes certainly did not help my back and my spine. And I had constant through my life, lots of things that happened just accidents or injuries and things that would cause problems. I also had a condition which, from a child, I was dropped as a baby, but I also had, it was my mum and dad, but I had other issues that all caused alignment issues. Now, what you've got to understand is that can put the organs. You think about people, if they have disc problems or spinal issues, what it can press on the lungs, the posture. Posture has a big thing in the body, and that's why when the body's traumatized, not just mentally and emotionally, but physically, it can put stress, a different type of stress, but a kind of physical stress, and then that can cause even more fight or flight aspects in the body. And I will go back into the pain and the posture. So anxiety and stress is one, and trauma. Now, the second one is absorption issues, and I've also put in that kind of conversion issues, but I'm going to get into that in another section as well. Now, for lots of reasons, people can have gut issues, and that's a very common problem for a lot of reasons, but the main reason is what is in our food. And even people that eat healthy, that don't tend to eat processed food, or food, even organic food. The reality is, unfortunately, we live in a very toxic world, right? If you just think what's in water, what's in our water table, you think about the amount of medication people take, and that's actually going into the water system and getting into the environment. These are just examples what can cause problems. There's a lot of other things that can cause heavy metals and things, which again can create problems with our gut. So there's lots of other things, and we can look at medical interventions that had previously in the past had a lot of heavy metals in, but that's another subject. But if we look at absorption issues, what is going on with absorption issues? Well, basically when we eat food, the whole point we eat food is to repair our body, to nourish our body, and to give us energy and vital force. When the body is not able to absorb the nutrients out of food and then convert it properly, you can have fatigue, because what happens is your body, and that goes into another challenge, but basically what's happening is your body is not getting the nutrients out of the food. Now, you see this a lot with, if you think about, a lot of people have deficiencies in nutrients. Now, one of the interesting things that people sometimes don't realise is that even though we live in a modern world and most of us wouldn't class ourselves as poor as maybe certain years ago, maybe how could you say a couple of 100 years ago, where people at certain times were malnutritioned. Many people are malnutritioned now because of the quality of the food. If you just look at what the average person has for breakfast or dinner or whatever, and not just what they're eating, but what the minerals and other things that are lacking in the food for lots of reasons. And that can be to do with what's in the soil. It can be to do with the organophosphates, or, things that are getting sprayed. There can be so many elements. But other than that, the absorption issue and the inability to absorb out of the body, absorb, out of our food what we need to convert, is a huge problem. And conversion, it's not just about, so some people have deficiencies, but if you go to a specialist, and these are all things that I needed help with. I had huge absorption issues. As a baby, I was lactose intolerant, but in my age and my area, you didn't get diagnosed with. My mum knew there was something going on, but but it wouldn't be later on that I realised that I had missing enzymes to do certain things, so I had a lot of problems. So when you have missing enzymes, for example, from the gut, that means then that you don't have basically these little things that actually help you absorb certain things for your food and convert it into what it needs to convert, right? So these are big challenges that many people have, because then they're not getting the nutrient out of the food. So no matter how much spinach or how much you're eating, you're not getting what someone else would get to convert, right? But absorption issues and gut issues are a big problem today. So they can be a big problem with a cause of fatigue or chronic fatigue. Now, Another one that is kind of obvious, but again, sometimes people miss it for a variety of reasons, is sleep. So insomnia, but not just about insomnia. Good quality sleep. People don't have good quality sleep, or they don't have good rest. And that's one of the reasons why, for many years, I teach accredited relaxation therapy, because I understood how important it is for people to achieve deep, deep rest and deep, deep quality sleep. Because it's not just about going to bed and, thinking you're sleeping, but it's about getting into all the different waves that are really important for the body to repair itself and the body to, do certain things. It does a lot of processes when we are at sleep. But again, also in relation to, we talked about about anxiety and stress. Like if people are chronically anxious and chronically stressed, the body produces a lot of hormones that are not really supposed to happen at certain times of the day. And for example, if you're constantly in that state of anxiety and stress and you're on the stress response, you're not in the relaxed response. And to achieve deep, deep rest in the body and a sense of being and a sense of peace, you want to be in the relaxed response, right? And that's why relaxation therapy is so powerful and so effective in helping often people with insomnia. And it can actually help a lot of people with fatigue disorders. Obviously, it's a multifaceted approach. But if you have insomnia, or you're lacking deep rest and deep relaxation, you can have a lot of problems. Now, some of the signs are that people wake up and they feel as if they've never slept, even though they slept and have clocked out for how long. Some other people wake up, or some people struggle to actually fall off to sleep. So sleep issues are not just to do with insomnia. It can be to do with not actually achieving deep quality sleep, or being able to get into certain brain waves. Now, again, one of the problems is there can be lots of other reasons why people don't go into sleep. One of the things that it would take me till now, I think it was now about maybe 8 years ago, which was a bit of a shocker to me, was actually and realise that a lot of my issues wasn't just to do with what happened with the mercury. But I was bitten by something at 14, so testing abroad, and there was reasons why I got testing abroad, would confirm that I had certain types of what they called Lyme co-infections, bacterial type infections, and and that was after, I was only 14, so you're talking a long, long time ago. And these are all other things that I'm going to go into that can cause fatigue. But the reality is some of these types of conditions, and when they lead into, if you have late stage Lyme, for example, there can be all sorts of things happen to the brain. And in this again, sometimes people have certain things going on that actually are a disease and a condition that actually impacts someone neurologically, which can make it more challenging for the body to go through all the different wavelengths and actually get rest. And of course, and things like, there's lots of other factors that can stop people getting sleeping properly and resting properly, and that can be due with pain and things like that. And we're going to talk about that as well. But most people today actually don't get enough sleep and enough quality sleep and enough deep rest. So that's a major problem today because they're so anxious and stressed. So that is a big cause. Okay. Now, another one is mitochondrial dysfunction or mitochondrial diseases. Now, a lot of chronic fatigue disorders in ME now, there's a lot of research and study on that it has become a mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, it's like everything. What I was, the chicken and egg scenario, what came first, what really, what something starts off with and what it ends up as can be very different. And again, as I said, because there could be more than a few things that's caused the problem. And then sometimes what happens, it's not just the original cause, even though that can be the root of it. sometimes then other things happen that add on that then cause another problem. So mitochondrial dysfunction, if you think about the cells, in the cells, each cell in our body is like a little powerhouse. And, it needs a certain amount of oxygen for the body to do what it's supposed to do and for the cells to do what it's to do, right? And oxygen, oxygenation is really, really important to, prevent us to have all sorts of things like cancers and disease, right? And the body has to be able to oxygenate the cells to, as I said, to have energy and to work like a wee powerhouse, to have energy. Now, there can be lots of factors that means that the body then has mitochondrial issues, and basically it's not oxygenating itself, so then it can have problems basically getting rid of toxins and other things, and I'm going to go into that in a minute. But mitochondrial problems means that the energy of the cells is very low, and it can be low in oxygen, which when you look into this, it gets very interesting when you look at even what happened with a lot of people with COVID with the lungs, right? And some of the things that can actually really interfere with mitochondrial dysfunction is things like electromagnetic frequencies, the ones that, are not good at me sitting even at the computer at the moment, the internet. And that's a whole other thing. And I remember someone showing me a video many years ago of what just the normal before we even had 5G, and what could happen to the cells, the body cells, and the oxygenation levels just sitting like with what comes through the internet. And it's very interesting. And then if you think about then how that has completely went, even the amount of exposure we have, a kind of radioactive exposure, and we have that from a lot of things, these all can impact the mitochondria cells. Now, this also relates to, now, if you think about, so I maybe should go back to the mitochondrial, there can also be obviously, they reckon there could be genetic aspects that people are more likely to suffer that, and that also relates to 5, and some people might put 4 and 5 together, but there's a reason why I've separated it. And 5 is methylation issues. And methylation issues, there's a clear thing about genetic issues. And methylation is this process where it's similar to the kind of mitochondrial dysfunctions, where, again, there is a strong similarities, some people might categorize it as the same in some ways. But methylation is the body to be able to methylate and be able to do certain chain reactions, be able to also, again, if you have methylation issues, you often can have problems detoxifying. Again, unfortunately, that was an issue that I had, and it took me many years to discover why. And I'll give you one good example, which is really easy to understand. Was I've done a lot of different detoxification programs, and I went to a lot of people who were supposed to be experts in detoxifying the body, right? And a lot of them had problems. I was very ill, and I ended up almost appeared to be more ill than what I was, and detoxification can make people very ill, but it was quite seriously ill, and lots of, great complications from it. And it became clearer and clearer the body was not able to eliminate the toxins fast enough so I had to be more gentle in the detoxification process. And then I remember, a lot of you might be aware of the medical medium, and he has some fantastic stuff, and I do believe in a lot of the things that he said, but every time I'd done some of his programs, and I used things like the celery juice, particularly the kind of recommendations he had in his first book, I had major teeth problems. Now, I was someone, that's a whole other story, something that happened to me as a child. So I had kind of weakness in my teeth, and I have some challenges that would make it, make you more prone to certain teeth issues. But I would have really ended up having sepsis and, lots of really bad infections to do with teeth. And, and one of the biggest things seemed to be was doing these detox programs. It was like almost the body was pulling the toxin out, but they were accumulating in certain parts of the body. Now, there's other reasons why I've also learned about how much the jaw, used to be up to about 21. This was one of your main ways that the lymphatic system, your chewing system, was also part of the lymphatic system. But when people end up having TMG, or jaw, or alignment issues in their jaw, that stops working, and then you can problems, which was another issue because of cranial issues I had, and bone issues, and my jaw being put out with dentists and things like that. That all can create problems with people, and a lot of people have TMG issues. Now, one of the things that the methylation problem, like the detoxification, is that it again can cause fatigue, but it can cause all sorts of other, and again lead to other types of diseases and issues. And lots of people seem to have this genetic thing with the methylation. There's a lot of things to do with the DNA, and I think it makes certain proteins and things like that. So again, this can become a problem. And as like I said, something that starts as something can then lead to another problem and another problem with certain clients. So it's always worth noting how long the person has had the fatigue, what type of things they've tried, and what else is going on, right, when you are trying to support them, right? And this is where a lot of people, when they use, I know lots of people who've went, and they've went for years to like something like EFT, years for acupuncture, years for certain things, years trying to do detoxification, and it never worked, years doing all sorts of work on the metaphysical cause of a disease. I've done all these things, and and I'd spend thousands of pounds, and it never, but it was because often the therapist wasn't taking a multifaceted approach, or the you as a person was not seeing the whole picture, right, and not addressing the full picture. So methylation issues is, and there is things you can take to support methylation. Thankfully, there's a lot more things that you can do now. One of the things is also, it depends on how severe the methylation issues, and a lot of people can have methylation issues, but there is different degrees. And again, you want to make sure that you're sending your client to someone that really knows what they're talking about, right? Now, another one that is a big problem with fatigue is when people have a lot of pain, chronic pain, or even postural issues, which we kind of slightly touched on. So postural issues can lead to all sorts of problems. For example, a lot of people are more prone to anxiety disorders and panic disorders when they have really bad posture up here, because when they then go into chronic anxiety or chronic stress, like what happens is that if the posture's poor, they're not open, and breathing is a big, powerful, it's a really important aspect of being able to have energy and vitality. So when you don't have good breathing, now people can have all sorts of structural issues, like, I'm a good example. I've actually got a facial condition that affects my ability to breathe evenly, right? So that causes an imbalance in the brain. This is just an example. Now, a lot of children, one of the things that I noticed when I taught meditation, I used to teach meditation in schools over 20 years ago. I started, and I noticed a lot of children, particularly Scottish children, would be walking about like that, particularly in the winter. Now, if you think about that, what that does to the body, that's tensing up. The body is not breathing properly. It's not getting, enough air in, and that actually impacts the cells of the body. So these are all simple things. But also, if you think about if someone has structural and alignment issues and it's pressing on the lungs, if you've had an injury, if you have a spinal injury, often it can push people that have, like, and if you have hiatus hernias and disc issues, sometimes what can happen is the body's getting pushed a certain way. So other than the pain, the person may often not be breathing properly. They have to catch their breath and move, they're doing things like that. These all can add to fatigue, right? These all can play a part. And another one that, we kind of has been more obvious at the moment is obviously viruses. Viruses, anything that's a pathogen can cause fatigue, and there's different reasons. Obviously, when the body's trying to fight a virus or a bacteria or a mold, right, the body is going into the inflammatory response often, or the body's trying to detoxify, the body's trying to deal with that. So fatigue, what we've also got to remember with fatigue is a sign, it can be a sign for the body to rest. And in some fatigue disorders, there's a lot of different belief systems, but that has caused some clients a lot of further problems and complications. So, sometimes people think that someone has a fatigue disorder, they automatically think they suffer depression. And for example, a lot of people with me, first of all, people thought that, but the reality is most ME people have never got a motivation issue. They tend not to have depression. They only end up with depression after maybe years and years of not being believed, misunderstood, or being abused or gaslighted by health or wellness. That's how they end up. Most of them will tell you that. Anybody that I've ever met that genuinely, was a clear diagnosis ME, most of them didn't have depression. I'm not saying there wasn't emotional issues of some kind and stress that triggered the disease as part of a whole array of things. But what, and I'll give you some examples. So I met people, this was many years ago, people who got an ME type thing, or even a chronic fatigue type disorder. They weren't clear, but it was quite severe. And it would be things like after a vaccine. Some people had a vaccine. I've seen a lot of people who'd maybe got a malaria, went and got, things like that. And for some reason, who there's lots of things like that. Obviously for me, as I said, I had something similar in relation. There was a metal in it, a toxicity, and I had some other things going on. And obviously then what would appear to be already bacteria in my body that was what you call it, the Lyme co-infections, a Lyme disease and co-infections. Now, one of the interesting things about bacteria loves to feed off heavy metals. So, and there's a whole, sometimes depends where the heavy metal ends up in the body. Sometimes the body struggles to eliminate it. And if you have a methylation problem, you'll struggle to eliminate that. But, viruses, bacteria, and mold, and I'll talk about mold in a minute, but all of these things thrive in certain things. They definitely thrive in things like sugar. So people that, that don't eat healthy, these are, big cause. That's why, there's a lot of opinions will say that behind cancer is a lot of sugars and things like that. But mold is one that, a lot of people don't talk about. And I'll be honest, it was one that, even though I had some awareness of it and some understanding of it, I missed it myself till a situation happened that really brought attention to me. I worked in a clinic, I'm trying to think now how long that would be, over 10 years ago anyway, I think. And when I worked in this clinic, at the time that I had actually then got sepsis and I had to give up some of my work, but the woman who's a good friend of mine who owned the clinic, she had started to suffer lots of different health challenges and discovered years after I left the clinic that there was a very dangerous mold in the clinic. It was not visible to the eye, but it was actually in the building. Now, the interesting thing is when I actually was originally mercury poisoned at 19, I was staying in a flat. I'd fell out with my parents. I was just young. And I was in this flat for a couple of months. And surprise, surprise, it was right above this building where the clinic I'd been working in. So it was years before, but I had been in this building when I was mercury poisoned and when I got the symptoms like a typical flu. And this shows you how sometimes there can be another key element in what is causing someone's problem. Now, that did go very rapid, but mercury poisoning is very dangerous. It's really, that's why they used to call a lot of dentists later in, before a lot of guidelines come in, that they'd call them mad hatters. They would end up with you know, appearing like a mad hatter because of their nervous system. Their nervous system was so damaged by the mercury. Now, some of my symptoms, you could look at it as if it's mercury poison, because I had for many years after sepsis a lot of still have some issues, but like shaking and what you would Parkinson type things and all that. And that's where it gets, you see, when you can see the bigger picture, where sometimes it's like a jigsaw, right? Looking at things like a jigsaw, and it's important to look at a client. And lots of clients are not as complicated as me, but it is important to recognise. So what happened in this incident, because she was so ill, was I was actually asked by the NHS to get testing. But at that point, I had been quite a few years down the line when she came. It was many years later than I had worked that she realised, and she became very, very ill. And she had a lot of cognitive decline, and there were some symptoms she had similar to mine, and there were some things she didn't. But one of the things was that some couple of specialists said when she mentioned she was concerned that that's, that I had it as well. They said, well, she would actually be more vulnerable because she's already got a compromised immune system. She's already had challenges in those areas. And this is where it's really, really important to remember there can be key things. Now, the interesting thing, I'd already been on a programme for a protocol for 5 years I treated myself for Lyme's because I wasn't allowed to get, for a lot of reasons, wasn't allowed to get what they would class as the antibiotics that you would treat someone with Lyme. And obviously it was very late stage, so there was a lot of issues getting mainstream medical treatment, so I had to go alternate. And I do prefer to go alternate anyway, but I was already on a programme that actually, a lot of the herbs and the things that were on it helped kill off certain mold issues. So when I got tested, I was kind of borderline. There didn't seem to be big issues, but it wasn't straightforward. But mold is becoming, they're learning more and more about mold, and they're also learning more and more about bacteria. And there's a lot of doctors and top, I don't even call them, I can't remember the name, bacteriologists and virologists, people that are in, that study pathogens are going on about how they believe that, for example, COVID, it wasn't the virus, it was the biggest problem, it had a bacterial component. And that's a whole other thing. And if you look at behind the scenes to do the story about Lyme disease and the back story of that, and you look at what was really going on, and I'm not going to say some certain things because this video will get flagged up, but if you look at, there was other things going on. If you look at experimental things that go on in labs, that's what I'm going to say, and things that go on, what's done. And I'm going to just explain this. This will maybe give you some information. For example, when I was tested in the UK for Lyme, my test, and you don't see this when other tests, gets sent to Porton, which is a bioweapon lab. So when that's where my test went. Now, that should give you some information right away. Now, I think I've already said something that this will be flagged, but there's this, so you've got your pathogens, you've got your bacterial, your viruses, mold, which for a lot of reasons compromise the immune system, compromise the bodies. The body's often struggles to detoxify, it's trying to detoxify, it's trying to fight against that pathogen, so that can cause fatigue. And at that point, what you've got to understand, the fatigue can be the body needing to rest, the body cueing that it needs the rest to repair itself. And this is so important to remember, because one of the things, and I think I lost my train of thought, was, well, one of the biggest mistakes that many doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists made many years ago that cost people their life in some aspect was assuming that, for example, ME and things that was all in the head, and pushing people to try and move against the fatigue. And many people ended up in wheelchairs, and some people ended up paralysed and things like that, because they were trying to make the body push and do things when the body was actually trying to fight the virus or bacteria, and it was needing the rest. Or there was other things going on with methylation, mitochondrial, a combination of things where the body was unable to repair itself properly. And then it was causing other dysfunction of the body. And this is so important to remember, right? So last but not least, definitely not, is 8, and that is toxicity. And toxicity can come in so many levels, because again, toxicity, if you think about what toxicity does to the body, lots of the things that I've already talked about, it can lead to then, it's like almost, if you think about all these things, they can all cause a chain reaction, and it can start off with one and it can end up that, or it can be 2 or 3 and end up with all these issues. And it can be a cat. It's almost like you've got to cut all of the issues. So if we think about toxicity, toxicity is such a problem today, because if you just even look at food, a lot of food is not even real food. It's actually artificially made, and that's insane. And when I look at energy, as a healer, for example, anybody that is, as a healer knows that the whole point of healing is it has a vital energy life force, right? It is kickstarting that life force, and energy has that vitality. Now, one of the biggest problems that a lot of things, if you look at modern medicine against like more naturopathic medicine and nature, is that nature has this vital, it's a natural life force. So, for example, there are some types of remedies and things that they actually don't even, they extract the energy, the essences from it while it's alive. They don't cut it, right? But when you cut something and you remove it from its life force or its energy force, like its roots or its water or whatever, it starts slowly to lose its energy force, till then there's not really anything left. And there's lots of modern medicine that has been created through a copy of the kind of atomic structure of there's things like St. John's wort. I'm trying to think. I think it's nettle. I think that's the one for aspirin. I can't remember, but anyway, what they've done is they just took the copy, and the pharmaceutical companies took the composition and copied it, and maybe just added another molecule to do something else. And why did they do that? Well, one of the things that happened many, many years ago was that the certain powers to be, that's what I'm going to say, realised, that they could only limit how much money they made from maybe taking herbs and things out the fields and out whatever and using nature, but they could make far more money copying something, because they couldn't patent something. And when you can patent something, that's a business concept where you make money out of patent. And that's what pharmaceutical companies do. They patent things, and they often take things and they add molecules and they play God in some ways. But if you look at something that is made and it's been planted outside and it's got the sun and the light, compared to something that's completely man-made, doesn't have that vital life force. And unfortunately, many people don't even realise each day they're actually eating things that are not even a vital life force. And we're getting a big push at the moment for our food to be taken over with artificial things. And this isn't so insane. But this is just an example of where there's no life force. But if you take it, things that are really obvious toxins, right? Toxins are things that are not supposed to be, for example, maybe in the body, or they're not that great, you're not natural, they're not healthy, they're not easily eliminated, in things like plastics, and as I said before, heavy metals, chemicals. And when I was getting help for the Lyme symptoms I had, I got all these tests. It was quite shocking, even though I'm someone is quite a clean eater. I tend to reduce as much things that are toxin in my life, because I've always had certain issues, which allergic reactions to things, and generally not liking things that are not natural. So compared to most people, I have a lot of things natural aware in my house, but like everybody, where can you get everyone's, like your carpets and synthetics, the things that you sit on are synthetic. That's reality now. But if you look at all of these things, and one of the things that the testing showed was all sorts of things in my bloodstream, and all sorts of things that, you would be thinking, how the hell does that get into my bloodstream? And that just gives you an example of what's in our environment. If even people go and get their hair, I tend to use natural dyes and things like that. But even when you're getting your hair dyed or the makeup you wear, I tend to wear mostly natural things. These they're all toxic, and they can impact the mitochondria. The more that your body is toxic, the more that you have absorption issues. Toxicity causes further absorption issues. Toxicity it feeds. So I mentioned before, heavy metals actually feed lots of bacteria and viruses, right? And if you think about even the air you breathe in, if you live in a city where there is a lot of smog and a lot of dirt, that can be again some people's another added issue for people that have already got a compromised system, right? If you think about simple things like carbon monoxide poisoning, all these things, these are all things that can cause fatigue because the body's not meant to breathe these things in. We'll also talk about mask wearing. Now, for a lot of reasons, I studied fabric now, and I saw, I could never understand this. And obviously, there's lots of science studies came out and things through courts came out about all that since then. But if you just even look at the fact that you put something over your face, right? Breathing is so important. It's part of, breathing in and out and getting enough air. I know as someone that has a problem with my nasal cavity and that I don't have a balance between my two nasal cavities, and how that can impact my health. How important it is that we do get as much clean air, and in how much we eliminate as well from the body. That's the way the body naturally processes things. If you put something in front of that builds up bacteria and all that, and that's been another thing. And I think is it the call it now, don't quote me on this, is it hyperoxia or something it causes, this is why lots of scientists kicked back. Lots of people were kicking back about these things and saying it was insane, especially when droplets are like compared to the whole in fabric, even though a fabric, you're not getting enough oxygen in, and how important it is for the body to have that oxygen to fight off infections and fight off bacteria, and to be able to fuel the lungs, fuel the body, keep us healthy, and actually also keep our anxiety levels reduced. When the body struggles to breathe properly, you're going to feel more stressed and anxious, right? But if you look even the size of the molecular virus, it's like the tiny thing on a piece of fabric is actually huge compared to the size of it. So it's still opening up to things. So that's a whole other thing. But what I mean is, if we look at all of these things, these all can be a big factor in also why certain people got post-COVID, right? These COVID type infections and struggle to recover. It can be a lot of things. Also, if people had a lot of fear and anxiety and stress, if you look at, maybe a lot of emergency doctors and a lot of things that was going on. And there's some people who were, in the medical field, and they were people who were actually in wards that were nothing happening. They weren't allowed to treat people with certain things, nothing going on. And then other people dealing with all sorts of things. So, these are 8 important things that can cause chronic fatigue type issues. And, it's always important to understand that these can all be major causes, but also they may not be the original trigger. But some of these can then end up, as I said, like it can be like a chronic fatigue cycle. And that means that one issue or a couple of issues then now have led to further issues. Because, for example, if you look at viruses and toxicity, if someone has got a high level of toxicity in the body, and they also are fighting off a bacteria, a mold, or a virus, or a combination of them, the body can naturally struggle to eliminate all that at the one time because it's like overload. So you add in then a methylation or a mitochondria issue, you've got a whole problem. Movement would be people are not moving. So it's so important to understand this, because even when you're trying to, a lot of people approach a lot of things from the emotional and the root cause and the mental belief of why someone is. But believe me, I know many people who have spent a lot of money in some of these things, and they're still not further forward. So it's important to always have a holistic approach and to open your mind to different causes with clients, and when possible, support your client to have a multifaceted approach. A multifaceted approach tends to help people much better. And I know for me, once I found out that the methylation issue was an actual real problem, and why I ended up iller with some of the detoxification processes, and why it worked for many people didn't work for me. Once I understood that there was a genetic component and there was something else going on there, it made a big difference, because it meant I could approach it completely different and would do certain things that maybe, would be right for most people, but were actually dangerous for me. So it's important that we always understand that the client and the individual. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. And if you would love to access more about some of my courses or training, check out www.stresscoachtraining.co. I also have a lot more like spiritual tools and courses and soul empowerment programs over at eileenburns.co.uk for more of you who are healers and light workers and empaths. Bye bye for now.